There are certain games that immediately spring to mind when talking about survival horror. Resident Evil, of course, and Silent Hill, but also the likes of Dead Space, Amnesia, The Evil Within, and Outlast. Tormented Souls needs to be added to that list. Releasing the game in the summer of 2021, publishers P-Cube audaciously declared in their marketing that classic survival horror is back, and they're not wrong. This game wears its survival horror influences on its sleeves. And almost from the moment you start a new game, you can see the developer's admiration for not only Resident Evil, but other classics of the genre. Looking beyond the use of fixed camera angles, limited ammunition and backtracking, you can see it in the gorgeously macabre aesthetics, the mournful and spine-jangling music, and the grotesque body horrors that haunt your trek through the game. The game has its flaws, which we will talk about, but overall, if you're after a satisfying survival horror experience from a modern game, then it's absolutely worth your time. From the beginning, the atmosphere of this game is near perfect. The sound design of the environments and the enemies lurking in the distance, combined with the graphics and lighting, are well tuned to keep you on edge at nearly all times. The classic survival horror element of fixed cameras suits this setup well, controlling what you can and can't see around corners, whilst managing to feel fresh and modern. Without the graphical limitations that demanded fixed cameras in the past, the dynamic 3D environments serve the gameplay and the horror, whilst the choice of when the camera is static or follows the player adds extra depth to the scares. There's nothing more tense than running down a tunnel with the camera a few steps ahead and focused on you rather on what may or may not be waiting to turn you into mincemeat. The world feels real and solid, and at the same time threatening, so that there is never a moment outside of save rooms when it will allow you to let your guard down. Combat in survival horror games is always a tactical decision rather than an absolute necessity, and the same goes here. Ammo is scarce enough that killing rather than avoiding an enemy always brings with it the risk that you won't have enough to kill the next enemy. When you do engage in combat, it doesn't feel too stiff or awkward, but even with the minor enemies, it's definitely not easy. Aiming means standing still and allowing the enemies to close the space between you. That may make it harder to dodge around them, something which is never easy anyway, given how narrow and closed off so many spaces are. You have a melee weapon if you run out of ammo, but that means getting close. For some enemies, you can preserve ammo by knocking them down with the shotgun and then beating them to death, but this takes time, and so you have to be aware of if an environment holds more than one enemy. The differing effects weapons have depending on which enemy you face adds an extra dynamic to the tactical considerations of combat, and in turn ammo conservation, all of which feeds into the feeling that even as you gain more weapons, you're always vulnerable to some degree. Like ammo conservation, puzzles too are a staple of the survival horror genre. Tormented Souls doesn't lack for them, and they will tax your brain. Because you'll pick up puzzle items far from where they need to be used at times, and because your map doesn't mark where the items or puzzle doors are, it's important to either remember what you need for where, or to make a note of it. Sometimes knowing that an item goes somewhere can involve out-of-the-box thinking. However, it has to be said that the puzzles can tip from challenging into obtuse. One example is a door knocker, which requires you to knock in a certain rhythm. Simple enough, and working out where to find the rhythm is suitably brain-teasing, but the absolute perfection you need in the rhythm goes beyond frustrating. There's a margin of error of microseconds, and I ultimately had to resort to pressing X in time with a YouTube video of someone completing the puzzle to get it exactly right. Another is pressing keys which match specific notes. Hard enough. And doubly so when the device playing the notes is separate from the puzzle, so you have to leave the puzzle to go hear it. Impossible without a guide for someone who, like me, is, to put it mildly, tone deaf. All the puzzles are satisfying to solve, but it's worth bearing in mind that there will be frustrating and obtuse ones, and that there's no shame in using a guide in those situations. The story of Tormented Souls is a compelling one, built upon an interesting and sinister premise. Some of the elements brought into the story that allow you to progress don't necessarily make any sense, but that's part of the charm of it. Like in so many other titles of the genre, the core story unfolds through cutscenes, but a much greater amount of the backstory and lore is told in diary entries and other documents that you pick up along the way. Without these documents, the story is serviceable, but with them, it's built upon a deeper foundation of heartbreak, tragedy, and betrayal within a family whose skeletons require far more than a single closet to house them. The voice acting in the game is good overall, and let down only by the fact that the character models don't reflect that acting. They hardly move at all, in fact, facing each other blankly when not in a cutscene as their dialogue plays out. However, this appears to come down primarily to the indie nature of the title and the time and resources available to the team developing it. It doesn't detract too much from the overall quality of the storytelling. What follows contains spoilers, so skip ahead using the timestamps in the description if you don't want to know any more of the story without playing through it. You play as Caroline Walker, who travels to Winterlake after receiving a photo of two twin girls and the message that she has abandoned them. Investigating the photograph, she enters the Wildberger mansion, which has been converted to a hospital, where she is attacked and knocked out. She awakens in a bathtub, missing an eye. Investigating the mansion, she shortly finds it full of all manner of horrifying creatures. These appear to be the previous patients of the hospital, experimented on and turned into monsters. She also encounters a priest, who appears to be nonplussed by the presence of the monsters, but nonetheless guides her on a quest. As you progress, you unravel the mystery of the mansion mansion. It seems that the twins in the photo were Anna and Emma Wildberger, the twin daughters of William and Maria. William's father Bertram and Maria's father Noah are responsible for the rebirth of a cult called the Pollock sect, which is dedicated to bringing about the rebirth of its god through the sacrifice of twins. Despite the increasing number of sacrifices and the nature of an egg which becomes dangerously radioactive, they are so far unsuccessful in their endeavours. Anna and Emma were born after their mother previously miscarried multiple times, these miscarriages being the results of experiments Bertram carried out without her knowing to try and get her to give birth to twins. With the eventual success, Anna and Emma are slated for sacrifice. However, when Noah kidnaps the girls, Bertram has a change of heart and helps Maria rescue them. They flee to an old wooden bridge where Emma falls and is presumed dead, whilst Anna is captured. Maria is left in a medically induced coma, covered in radiation burns and feral when awakened. William experiments on hospital patients in his efforts to find a cure for Maria's condition, creating the creatures that you battle through the game in the process. Eventually he cures her, and she dies after telling him that Noah had the girls, but he dies when his wine is poisoned. This is where things get weird. In investigating the mansion, Caroline is able to travel outside of the bounds of the world in two ways that are never actually explained. One is through mirrors, into a dark reflection of the world, which allows it to solve puzzles in creative ways. For example, a corpse in our world without a heart is reflected as a doll, and inserting a plastic heart into its chest replaces the corpse's heart, allowing you to electrify it so you can take a tea handle from her hand. The other is through projections of videotapes into the past. In doing so, Caroline frees Anna from her cell by using acid on the chains, resulting in Anna escaping to live in hiding in the sewers for 14 years, until recaptured by Noah. He also travels to the past through other tapes to solve puzzles in the present. Most bizarrely, in order to finally enter the secret hideout of the cult where they are nurturing their god, she goes back to after she's knocked out in order to remove her own eye from her sedated body, so that she can activate both retinal scanners at the same time. The reason that this works is that she turns out to actually be Emma, having survived the fall from the bridge, and this revelation leaves her determined to rescue Anna from her fate and defeat Noah, who is of course the priest. This is not to be, unfortunately. Before reaching this point, she has been stalked through the mansion by a monster different from the others, naked and with a sagging, grotesque body. It was unkillable and kept pursuing her in a manner akin to Mr. X from Resident Evil. Later on, having found a syringe filled with some form of cure, using it on the monster reveals it to be Anna, mutated by the god's radiation. With her sister at rest, Anna pushes on to defeat Noah and his god in a final battle before fleeing the mansion. There are three possible endings here. Going back into the past on the way out and using newly acquired bolt cutters allows Emma to rescue and adopt a younger Anna, sparing her from her fate. Not doing this means Anna is left dead, but at least avenged. Not interacting with the monster at all and escaping without Anna sees the monster kill Emma just before the credits roll. The fact that neither the mirror world nor the time travel are explained does make these elements somewhat jarring. It would have been possible to tell a broadly similar story without them and still have the same impact in terms of drama and tragedy. With that said, the unexplainable nature of them does feed into the supernatural and unknowable nature of the cult, their god and its effects, so it's not inherently a bad thing. Overall, it's just a little bit silly. Even so, I'm a big fan of this story and the horror built into not just the atmosphere of the mansion but also the deeper lore. From the sacrificed twins, experimentation on pregnant women and the cruel fate of Anna, this is a story with far more to it than monsters in a mansion, and just like Resident Evil, it's ultimately built on unfathomable human cruelty, overcome by the will of a character persevering despite being out of her depth. If you're a fan of survival horror and you ought to play this game, it's a game that is, in my view, criminally underhyped. Especially having come out in 2021 when a lot of people were decrying the lack of games out in that year. There are flaws, and it's rough around the edges, but it's ultimately a game that harks back to the golden era of survival horror whilst adding its own touches and a modernity that make it more than just a nostalgia trip. It's challenging, scary, and compelling in all the right ways. Give this video a like if you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments if you've played Tormented Souls and what you thought, or if watching this review has made you want to pick it up and give it a go. You can watch my full playthrough in the video linked here and support my content by checking out the link in the descriptions on my Patreon. You can gain early access to videos and get a shout out in them if you join to help me make more and better content. Thanks for watching, see you next time.